Hey, deserving listeners, happily ever after, let's watch and see what happens.
In a broken household. Half the kids live with me, the other half live with my ex, and,
Your ex has a name.
Really
my name is Pamela.
Okay, that's interesting. I've only watched literally like 15 seconds of the session thus far, and there's so many interesting things that are happening. The Pamela speaks up. It's an interesting choice. And I get her point. Chuck kind of stumbled and referred to Pamela, as if she weren't in the room. He says, between me and my ex, and Pam was like, well, my name's Pamela. And there sounds like there's some history there, maybe, I don't know. But it's also notable the way Pam said that, the way Pam did it, right? It's sort of childish in a way to say it that way. We would hope that Pam, being the mom and hopefully an authority and a leader of the family, that she wouldn't behave in a overly combative way, especially right off the bat. I mean, she's literally said nothing in the session thus far, and the first thing she says is combative. Now, she could certainly say later on, it's like, so Chuck, I just want to let you know that when you refer to me as your ex, it just kind of hurts my feelings because I'm sitting right here. You can refer to me as Pam. I don't know what you mean by that, but I feel like you often do things like that. I don't know. We can certainly bring it up, but to interrupt and just slap him across the face verbally, I mean, that's strong. But to do that is to not consider the bigger picture. You would hope that, and of course that's part of the problem, but you would hope that Pamela would think, well, that hurt my feelings, what he did right there. But the bigger picture here is I need everyone to get along, and I need to lead the way. I need to model behavior that is healthy. And, I'll let that one go. If that keeps happening, I'll say something, but it's what's the bigger picture? And that's what differentiated individuals do. You often hear me talk about differentiation, but it's pretty complicated, but it obviously pertains to family therapy quite a bit, but really any kind of therapy, is that the differentiated individuals are more likely to be able to see the bigger picture, to hold on to the overall goal. Now, we don't know what Pamela's goal is, but we would imagine that there's at least part of her hope is that people will love each other and that the family can get along. I would just imagine that that's the case. And if she were able to be differentiated and hold on to that and remember that as there's tension and triangulation happening in the family, that she'd be able to refer back to that goal and make sure that she doesn't do things that's counter to that. When we are undifferentiated, our feelings and our reasoning ability become fused, and we can't tell the difference between the two. And so when we have a knee-jerk reaction of just like, well, I have an impulse to say this right now, there's no ability to separate from the feeling and to have your reasoning ability kind of look at that and say, well, is that really important in this moment? Is that the most important thing to pay attention to? Do I really want to start the very first family session by aggravating Chuck when I'm not even really quite sure if that was a dig at me? Do I really want to model for my kids this way? Do I want to stress my kids out with yet another fight between me and Chuck? You know what? I don't want to do this, so I'm just going to lay low on this one, not blurt out this statement.
She's saying she grew up in a broken household. Half the kids live with me, the other half live with my ex, and,
Your
that's
ex
all
has
she
a name.
really
my
knows.
name is Pamela.
What you would like is to see people be able to spend time together comfortably and happily.
So really good technique with Dr. Malloy. And who knows if there was, because that seemed a little edited, but instead of getting bogged down in that triangulation and that interaction, she focuses on Chuck in terms of what he's saying and validates him or reflects back. Do I have this right? You want people to get along? And it sets a precedent in the session of just like the fact, and I don't know if it was edited, but if it is how it played out, for someone just to kind of throw a combative statement out there. As a therapist, if you don't regard it, it sort of, sends a message of just like, well, I'm not going to attack you for doing those kinds of things, but I'm also just not going to fully acknowledge it. When it's your turn to talk, well, obviously I'll be tending to you as well, but I'm just not going to get bogged down in that, or I'm not, because there's so many different things Dr. Malloy could have done. She could have said to Pamela, yeah, okay, so Pamela, you're saying that you feel hurt that Chuck didn't say your name, that he said, trying to encourage that. Now, and that wouldn't be necessarily a bad move, but it would really change the flow of the session, and maybe, some therapists would think that would be good. And some therapists are that way. I will dip into this sometimes where we call it immediacy, where you don't really have an agenda. You're just immediately reacting to what happens as it's happening. You're in the moment. You don't try to, because in this moment, the therapist is just trying to get this back on the rails. Whereas an immediacy therapist, there are no rails. It's just like whatever's happening right now, I just ask, so you'd say to the mom, it's just like, so what are you saying there? Or Chuck, what do you think about that? And you're always just reacting to what's happening. Or even as a therapist, you'd be like, okay, so I'm observing this. What do y'all think? You're just right in the moment. But to establish leadership, particularly over 9 clients in a family session, it would probably be more prudent and safe to make sure that you give everyone some validation as they're telling you why they want to be in therapy.
Again.
Yeah, of course.
I just want to say that our family was close until Libby married Andrei, and he got in the family.
From your perspective,
And
that
Okay, good. So earlier I was talking about how in family therapy, inevitably, you're going to hear people have pretty combative or undifferentiated or contemptuous or, I don't know, perspectives that are against other people, blaming other people. And so Chuck in this moment chimes in and says, basically everything is Andrei's fault. And how do you listen? How do you validate everyone in the room? Because you want to start off that way, while also not alienate other people. So, and we'll rewind this. So if you're going to fully validate Chuck or Charlie, and maybe in your mind you're thinking, well, I'll reserve judgment, but I really want Charlie to feel safe to tell me things. So validation in therapy means a lot of different things. It does not mean approval. It just means that you understand someone. There's probably better words like just reflecting that you fully understand what they're saying and that you're open to what they're saying. But you don't necessarily approve or not because you don't know. But Charlie says it's all Andrei's fault. And then as a therapist, if you're focusing just on Charlie, you might say something like, oh, okay, so when Andrei entered the family, everything went wrong. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, that's not approval, but you run the risk of, if you word it that way, it could be perceived as approval by the people who are on the side of Andrei, right? And at least at this moment, you would perceive that at the very least Libby and Andrei together, and perhaps Chuck as well. And so how do you do that? Well, Dr. Malloy decided to kind of ride the line a little bit and say something like, okay, yeah, but from your perspective, if I were in her shoes, and I'm sure I would flub it, to some extent because it's such a chaotic situation with 9 people and I had never met them before, but, me sort of armchair quarterbacking, I would have worded it more just like, oh, okay, well, you're telling your perspective, but, tell me more. So it's a subtle communication, right? That's the thing as a family therapist. You're not just communicating with Charlie, you're communicating with everyone, all with different points of view and hopes and dreams for this therapy session. So, so I'm nodding to Charlie. I'm like, oh, okay. So what I'm hearing is that according to you, when Andrei entered the family, then a lot of things went wrong. Okay, this is your perspective, and I want to, and I might even kind of look at Andrei and be like, I want to hear from your perspective in a second. But yeah, okay, tell me more. So I'm actively validating and listening and open, but I'm kind of throwing it out there that I'm not taking it hook, line, and sinker, and so it would buy me some time. And that's the thing about the beginning of these sessions and the first session in general is that there's so much dancing you have to do as a family therapist. You have to make sure that everyone, because the problem that you're trying to avoid is that if any one of the members is alienated significantly by the session, particularly if they're alienated from you, they probably won't come back because there's a lot of incentive to not come back to the second session. Time constraints, money constraints, it's just conflictual, or it's not working, or you felt so. It's important. One of the most important, and I would often tell novice therapists this when they're heading into their first few sessions. Their head is swimming in all this theory and everything, and I'd be like, connect, listen, validate, understand, ask questions, make sure that they feel that you understand them. Focus on that. Don't focus on anything else. Just listen and really enter their world and try to understand them. Do nothing about it in the first session, particularly if it's your very first session as a therapist, because it's too much to handle. Plus, when we do that as therapists, and some therapists will neglect this for various different reasons, then you can lose a client. You can have a client that just doesn't want to come back. So how do you make all 9 people feel understood and heard and at least somewhat valid? to make them feel like you're open to each one of them, even though they're at very much odds with each other? How do you make Charlie feel understood and Andrei understood? How do you make Charlie like you and Andrei like you as they're talking about each other, right? And I'm guessing Charlie and Andrei both don't want to go to a second session. So you have to get them to like you. You have to get them to not feel alienated as you're getting each one of them to like you. And you also have to convince them that therapy is worth it. It's a tall order, but when you get good at it, you get good at it.
Norm is abnormal.
Well, what is normal?
I think I understand what she's saying. She grew up in a broken household. Half the kids live with me, the other half live with my ex, and,
Yours
that's all
has
she
a name.
really
My
knew.
name is.
Okay, I missed that as well, that Charlie kind of says, disapproves of what Chuck was saying there. I think because Charlie has the perspective that everything was fine until Andrei. Everything was 100% fine. It's this black and white point of view. Denial, denial, denial. Scapegoat, scapegoat, scapegoat.
Miss Pamela.
What you would like is to see people be able to spend time together comfortably and happily again.
I keep saying all these things because there's just so much to say. Have I ever had an opportunity to watch family therapy on this YouTube channel? I don't think I've ever had an opportunity. I obviously talk with my students about it a lot, and we watch a lot of sessions, but I can't remember it. It must have happened at least once or twice, but it's pretty rare. Anyway, so, and I've talked about this before, is one perspective, and it's impossible to verify this scientifically, but one model of looking at family systems is that when a family has a problem, and in my view, and not every family therapist sees it this way, but in my view, it has to do with meeting each other's attachment needs. It's because it's a big part of being in a family, being in close relationships with people, is we all have needs for attachment, security, and support and love. The family needs to be able to facilitate that, and there needs to be routines and relatively low conflict, open communication, fully understand each other, differentiation in each member, which is a tall order, such that everyone can be close. Because why are these people involved with each other at all? Why don't they just say, see ya? And, because if they were coworkers or distant friends, they probably would just do that, right? They'd be like, well, obviously me and that person, we don't get along, so screw it. The reason why is because families, one, are often quite bonded through space and time and through attachment, at least to some extent, but also, the meaning of family and the hopes and dreams that we have around that and our associations with those particular individuals. So anyway, when a family has a problem that is preventing them from meeting each other's attachment needs and love needs for each other, then the family will figure out a way subconsciously to try to fix it. And the family as a whole, and that's one of the ways of family systems, individuals will look at families as not as a set of individuals, but as a collective whole. You might look at individuals, but you also understand that the organism as a system operates as a unit. And when that unit collectively is trying to get better, they're trying to have a situation where everyone can meet each other's needs, then they try various different things. And one of the things that they will try is that they will cause one person or a relationship to have so many problems that it alerts everyone to the underlying issue. It might even drive the family into therapy because subconsciously the system knows that if we amplify a problem, it'll become so out of control that everyone will agree that they have to do something to change. They won't just live with the status quo. So one possible way of looking at, everything that we're being presented is that for many, many years, there was a lot of status quo, a lot of denial, a lot of sweeping it under the rug, putting it on the back burner. And it was getting worse and worse and worse. And maybe the addiction was getting worse in addition to that or something. And then the system will elect and individuals will volunteer and subconsciously say, I'll be this person, to push the family towards such an unhealthy place that they will have to address the problem underneath everything. So you could argue that Charlie was elected and he volunteered to have an addiction problem that would result in a behavioral problem that would result in the things that we've seen, and would push the family into family therapy. Also, Andrei could be elected to that role. That's one way of seeing this, is that would the family be in family therapy if Charlie hadn't become more, if he wasn't such a problem, if the relationship between Charlie and Andrei wasn't a problem, right? So the family will subtly try to engineer these problems, and the individuals will subtly move towards that. You could argue that Charlie and Andrei have sacrificed themselves for the family good by being so rigid, and you could argue that Becky and Jen are involved in this as well, that they all subconsciously know that if they create so much unreasonable conflict that eventually they'll end up in family therapy, and maybe that will finally change things. That happens a lot. There's no scientific way to prove this because there's too many variables. And I'm talking about unconscious system, processes. But it stands to reason. As a therapist, when you recognize that, you're just like, and you might even say that. Sometimes I'll say that as a way of trying to give people optimism. I might say, like, at the end of the session, I'll say, there's this perspective in family therapy that everyone is trying their best to make the family a better, more enjoyable, more loving place. And when there is a problem in the family that people find it impossible, they think it's impossible to change for the better, they will volunteer to create a lot of chaos and noticeable issues that will drive them to therapy, so that on the surface we're addressing this surface issue, but really everyone is hoping that we're going to address the underlying issue. And I don't know what that underlying issue is, but I want to thank Charlie and Andrei for, one way of seeing it is that they volunteered to sacrifice themselves and maybe their relationship to push the family to come into therapy. And so thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Andrei. And can everyone thank them? It'd take quite a commanding leader as a therapist to get everyone to thank them. But imagine if you could engineer that, how it would really flip things on its head, and the clients hopefully would walk away saying, like, wow, I never even thought about it that way. And Charlie and Andrei could see it in a different way, and they could actually have self-esteem about, because I'm guessing at least Charlie has a lot of shame about everything that's happened up until this point. I think he does.
What you would like is to see people be able to spend time together comfortably and happily again.
Yeah, of course.
I just want to say that our family was close until Libby married Andrei, and he got in the family.
From your perspective,
And
that's
then-
the catalyst.
After she
So even that word that she used, the catalyst, and that's one of the techniques of family therapy, is you start reframing things. You start subtly rewording. You're agreeing with them, but you're using a slightly different word. So the thing that she's saying, this is just standard family therapy, it's pretty common, that Charlie is saying everything is Andrei's fault, but she's saying, okay, from your perspective, that's the catalyst. Okay, that's a very different story. It's a very different narrative. The catalyst, that Andrei was the catalyst, he's not the problem. Catalyst, probably, from Dr. Malloy's point of view, is this family has issues. We've heard it from Libby, and she was there, that the family has always had issues, and she didn't perceive it, but I don't think, because she wasn't looking that direction, that Becky also agreed that the family has always had problems. And that would usually be the case. So she's like the catalyst. That's, it's really smart to say that.
I just want to say that our family was close until Libby married Andrei, and he got in the family.
From your perspective,
And
that's
then-
the catalyst.
After she got married, her husband got in her ear and basically was trying to be divisive in our family, and then got in my dad's ear, trying to turn my dad against me.
Yeah, and right away, as a family therapist, I would be extremely skeptical of that. That somehow this outsider comes in and is like slowly manipulating everyone. He manipulated Libby, and then he manipulated Chuck. And, you might wonder if it's true with Libby, but with Chuck, it just doesn't seem like that's likely the scenario. So right away you go like, oh, okay, interesting. This Charlie client is pretty hell-bent on a particular point of view. And it just makes you wonder if behind the scenes, Chuck is the main, or Charlie, I keep messing up the name, that Charlie is the main driver behind the scapegoating of Andrei, that, because he's so bent on it, or if it's a collective thing. Because up until this point, it looks like a collective thing that several members of the family agree on, that the irrational scapegoating of Andrei is the whole problem. But it also could be that Charlie was the main architect of it because he needs to become not the scapegoat anymore. He needs to avoid being told that he needs to stop using. I don't know.
In our family. And then got in my dad's ear, trying to turn my dad against me.
No, my relationship with you has been strained, and the reason is because of your disrespect towards me. You text me late at night when you've been drinking, and you say all kinds of nasty disrespect.
Okay, I don't think we knew this. We knew that Charlie was doing this to other family members, but at the very least, that as a therapist, if you're Dr. Murray, like, oh, okay, we're getting into it. That Charlie doesn't seem to be scapegoating Chuck. He's scapegoating Andrei. And then Chuck's like, no, that's not the situation. Andrei's not the problem. You're the problem. So that would be another thing I would notice is like, so it looks like there are two scapegoats in this. So there's a lot of data along those lines. And I'll be curious to see what Dr. Malloy would do. There'd be a very strong temptation countertransference-wise to align with Chuck's perspective because he seems to be the most differentiated, the most balanced person up until this point, and to hear him saying, it's not Andrei, it's you, Charlie. He's not saying it in an aggressive way. He's not saying it directly, but he's kind of saying that. But then another bomb that Chuck just dropped in the room was the alcohol thing, which I think is going to tweak Charlie and Megan. I think they were hoping that at the very least the alcohol issue wasn't going to be brought up quickly. So I'm worried that Charlie is now going to like stand up and walk out or somehow. So there's a lot of sometimes in the first session, particularly, family systems will resort to very obvious mechanisms of the system, very obvious routines of negative feedback to make sure that everything stays the same. And so there's a possibility. So the temptation for Chuck or for Charlie, given the pattern of this family, I guess the temptation for the family, for Jen, maybe Becky, for Pam, and for Charlie, maybe Megan, is to provoke Andrei because they know through experience, and they're right, that if they poke the bear, the Andrei bear, he's going to come out swinging, and then Andrei will do ridiculous things, and then the scapegoating of Andrei will be facilitated. And Andrei seems to be on the edge of his seat wanting to say a bunch of things. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.